thank you for joining us today on TC Live, How Big Deals Get Done. My name is Keo Gwede. I'm an editor at TechCabal, and with me today is IC's Nyong'o Madison, who is the CEO of Bliss Group. And Bliss Group is the holding company that was formed through the merger of MumsVillage Kenya, where ISIS was initially CEO, and Baby Bliss Nigeria. And Bliss Group is an omni-channel Pan-African e-commerce platform for maternal and baby care products, but it's also a content platform and a community platform for parents across Africa. Consider it like a digital village for raising children. ISIS has extensive media and tech business experience and has previously worked at Google, at InMobi, at MTV, at Viacom, and is one of the World Economics Forum Young Global Leaders. I'll let her tell us a little bit more about her background and her career journey as we go along. Thank you again, Isis, for being here. I really appreciate your time. So I'd like you to share with us a little bit about your career journey, especially from starting your career, just briefly, to founding MumsVillage Kenya.
Sure, no problem. And thank you for having me. I enjoy TechCabal, especially the newsletter. So it's really good to be here and have a chance to have this conversation in depth. To share a bit about my background, I am Kenyan American by heritage, raised in both continents, so have a very American, Kenyan perspective, I should say, on things, and have spent my career, a lot of education in the US, but my career on the continent, and that has been to really build and scale digital media and technology companies. That's really been what I've done. When I finished business school at Harvard, and that's 15 years ago now, I then spent 10 years working at first MTV Africa. That's actually when I first came to Nigeria, was through the lens of MTV. So you can only imagine how interesting that was. And but really it was quite a formative time because that's the first time I worked around the continent. So I spent several years developing and negotiating television content deals for Nigeria being a key market, Angola, South Africa. So really quite a Pan-African experience, a little bit skewed to Anglophone Africa, learning how to do multi-market deals around television content distribution, as well as advertising deals, like sponsorship deals. At that time, it was the Nokias of the world and the Motorola's that were spending significant money on advertising and advertising to the youth, which was really the focus for MTV around music. So it's been very interesting. That time, music and digital were not in the same industry, which is of course very different now. But then I then joined Google. Google had just started to open up into Africa. So I was the first commercial hire for Google and joined them doing kind of similar work that I did at MTV. However, it was from a technology lens, and it was looking at my role was in partnership. So how do we build partnerships both with government, education, media companies to really enhance both the usefulness of the internet and to improve connectivity. So we're talking about 10 years ago, long before we were able to, have webinars like we are having today. That was definitely not something that was possible then, because there are a lot of connectivity challenges in our markets. So a lot of that was kind of the building the infrastructure of the internet in terms of not only access, but to have it more interesting for new African users onto the internet to use it quite a bit. So I think both MTV and Google really entrenched me in the value of local content, whether it was music content or the types of content, and that most of the content that was available online was very global in nature and not relevant and not contextual to our environment. And then after that, I joined InMobi, which is a mobile advertising platform, more of a B2B company so if you're on your smartphone and you're using an app, you might see an advertisement there for something. We were kind of the infrastructure behind there to serve ads and mobile internet, smartphones were starting to take off at the time. So I can pause there, but that was really my corporate experience before becoming an entrepreneur. And I think during that time saw and experienced such dramatic changes in our markets, and was fortunate to work at companies that were playing influential roles and what we enjoy today in terms of internet access, cheaper connectivity. Of course, we're still trying to get there, and it's not equal everywhere. But I think it's been amazing to be part of that, this developing story. Yeah.
Okay. So it's interesting that you mentioned about the issue of contextual content or contextual information, because I remember when we spoke earlier in July, that was one of the reasons you mentioned that you did start MumsVillage. So I wanted you to sort of share a little bit about that venture, that why MumsVillage, and how did you envision the business as at 2015? Yeah.
Sure. So after that stint, I decided that as a kind of a personal growth that I wanted to start my own company. This is not something that I necessarily knew. It was kind of towards the end of the corporate time. And it was also during a time where a number of companies were being started, both in Lagos, Nairobi, et cetera, technology companies. And so you kind of could see that not only people starting to build their own companies, but also at a time where there was more capital coming into the markets, looking at technology opportunities. Because I think before then, it was extremely hard for the technology companies to raise money, 5-10 years before that, especially any kind of international capital. So I was interested in this as a personal growth for myself. And as I looked at, what are the things that I could do, I looked at my strengths, I looked at my interests, and I found that I really felt that I had a growing awareness around both women as a consumer of different sorts, and that I realized that nothing in my work before had ever really focused on women first or women at all. Whether it was as the end consumer, as the audience, as the product managers, the teams building for our markets, because working in technology teams, you work very closely with product managers, et cetera. And for the most part, when I was at these companies, they were all very male, and a lot of them not African either. So I think I started to feel that there was always this challenge around the lens, or what's valuable to work on or what to focus on. And I thought, here I'm in a unique position as a woman who's both, the end consumer for many things, but also had the ability to start a company. And so I decided I'm really going to focus on women. And that was a very conscious decision, that of all the things that I could do, I was going to focus on women. And then I also, within that kind of exploration, came out this category, and I was very kind of content biased category of the motherhood stage, in terms of, and I could see that it was very rich in terms of how much information was out there globally, both the kind of the volume of products that people buy at this stage. And so I could really see the opportunity there, dug deeper into it. And that's where that's how the why started. And then really involved into the motherhood space, and seeing a very large need there, both in terms of content and access to products as well.
Okay. So before we get into the specifics of the merger, you started your company at a time where the tag femtech, which refers to products or health tech products that specifically focus on women, wasn't really a thing at the time. Globally in Africa, it wasn't just really a thing. So I'm wondering, for you, what were the challenges that you faced, specifically because your business was solely or primarily targeted at women?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think I underestimated what the challenges would be. So the way that I approached also building the company was very, very female oriented, in terms of, I think I also started to become much more conscious of how work environments are really built for men. And there's a lot of kind of awareness about this and conversation. And so I thought, I'm going to build a company that's really female first in our DNA and everything that we do, in terms of who we work with, the structure of our teams. And it's not female only, but a female orientation, especially to a world that's a heavily male orientation. And that kind of came through not only in our work and who we were serving, but I remember when I built my first pitch deck to pitch to investors, and I did kind of a few test pitches with a few friends, and one was a former colleague from Google that started her own company, and she was in the US. And one of the things that she said immediately, she's like, the hardest thing to do is be a female focusing on a female problem, like focusing on women, she's like, you're doing the hardest thing that you could imagine doing. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she said, the problem is, it's much easier to access money as a man. And we're talking 5 years ago, right? It's much easier to access money as a man. And as a man, if you were a man doing this business, it'd be much easier for you to raise money because you would be seen as so unique and insightful that you could see that mothers had a challenge and you were not that person. And I started to look at a lot of the companies that were in the baby space around the world. And a few of the really large ones were all founded by men. And I was shocked. I mean, I think when I started to be a bit more aware of this, but I think you also feel that you're going to be different, right? You have great experience, you have, all these things to go for, you have a pedigree. It's very hard. It's very hard. And I think that I think some of what many women do face when and it may be that their business is not focused on femtech or women at all, but if it is often seen as a hobby. And I think I've heard that directly to myself. By people who assume that it's the assumption, and they'll say it is just that this must be a hobby. And so I think that's something that there's a lot more, I think, conscious awareness of these biases around how people look at opportunities and how they look at founders and leaders who are trying to solve problems. They're definitely not solved, but at least there's a conversation about it. Yes, now.
I mean, I find this interesting because it's like, so one of the conversations that we had was around, are women really a niche market? Like when you say that you're addressing like just the female audience and people think that, oh, this is niche, it's just a small section of the population. And then, but you're wondering, like, women are not really that small. Like when you look at it in the numbers, when you look at it, the opportunities available, and the kind of the volume of commerce or of economics that, is attached to the female gender, it's really not niche.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, or let's get into the merger. And I think first question around that would be, how did you meet the team at Baby Bliss Nigeria? And, like, how did that conversation really even start?
Sure. It was quite an organic process, and it didn't begin with, let's meet and have a merger. I've met different people on the team over some years. And I say that because, I think that even though I don't think women are niche, working in the mothering space is niche. And so once you're working in a space, you notice the other people working in that space as well, right? And when we set off to do this, we always had a Pan-African vision for it. I think it's just part of what's in my blood from the work I've done before, and could see this was an issue everywhere. And so noticing that Baby Bliss was already in the commerce space, and it had been our strategy to start with content and get to commerce at some point. I started actually engaging even before we built an e-commerce pilot. And it was more to, you're just in the same small industry, if you want to call it, you share ideas, you're in different markets, so you're kind of curious about what's different in each other's markets. And so it really started from that perspective, and then over time grew into, hey, maybe we should try to partner. And then I think really started to accelerate when we had actually done a pilot in Kenya around e-commerce, because then we had more of a very clear, hey, we're really doing the same thing now in these two different markets in terms of building from the e-commerce perspective. So that's kind of how it started.
Okay, and then from that start to like finish or to like completion, how long did that take? What was the process like?
Yeah, so from that part, and then there was a lot of talks about, should we partner in this way? We could, and then when we really kind of sat down, this was end of last year, so pre-COVID, thankfully, was, hey, maybe when you kind of step back and look at, there really is a big opportunity here, both teams on both sides and an interest in building something beyond their own market could see a Pan-African opportunity, estimated over $4 billion opportunity. So it actually makes sense. Instead of trying to find these ways to actually partner, why don't we actually merge the companies and build off the synergies that are very clear, a very shared vision, very similar culture, and then we can actually accelerate what we're doing from a growth perspective, and be able to, and then actually be present in two of the most important markets on the continent. And I think that it's been well received from an investor perspective. The conversations that we've had have been like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And it's also easier for investors to say, okay, I'm going to actually invest in something that's in 2 markets. So we don't have to kind of start to do the work to test in one market, see if it's going to work. So it accelerates those conversations as well. So it really started in earnest end of last year, made the decision to do it. Luckily spent quite a bit of time on it early before COVID. And then COVID certainly slowed down the process and completed it in the middle of this year. So I think it probably took closer to 8 months, but could have been much shorter.
What were the specific challenges that like COVID brought about, for the process or during the process? Like what parts of the merging process really saw?
I would say it was primarily in two areas. One, that when the crisis hit, it really was a crisis. I mean, there was a lockdown in Lagos. There was kind of partial lockdown here. So that meant that the resources focused on the merger had to like focus on other things because this kind of unexpected global, fire hit everybody, right? So partly it was attention on other really, really pressing things was one. And I think the other thing that slowed it down was from a legal perspective, because in certain markets, some of the legal offices were closed, or, so then that just became a bit of a just ability to complete things from a paperwork perspective got long and drawn out as a result.
Okay. Also, like just as an aside, what else or what parts of the business currently like has been affected by the COVID situation? Yes.
Sure. I mean, we definitely were impacted by certainly and still are from a supply chain perspective, because we buy and then sell and hold inventory. And so from a supply chain perspective, not only have the costs gone up, product availability has also become less predictable, and the need to source only locally versus before having an easier ability to buy globally and have inventory shipped in. It's thrown all of that off, and it's still affecting us. So we just don't have the, let's say, the product variety available at the price point that we did before.
Okay. So back to the merger, what were the specific, or let's say like what were 3 top specific considerations that you had to make to decide that this was a way to go forward? What were the things that you said, okay, I see synergies here, or joining forces, coming together, would serve us better? And how did you think about structuring it? So this is a 2-in-1 question. And how did you think about structuring the holding company in a way that's that made up for the fact that one company is in Nigeria and the other's operation is in Kenya?
Yeah, sure. So some of the considerations, okay, so there are a number of them, but I think at the top level, is there kind of a shared vision for the opportunity, pursuing the opportunity, and conviction around that? And I think that was very clear. Second was a consideration around what will be the synergies within the company, within the team. The MumsVillage team came with strengths around content and building communities. That was an area that Nigeria wanted to grow into. So how do we accelerate that from having that brought on? The Nigeria team had a stronger technology, infrastructure. How do we then kind of benefit from that as a group? And then considerations around how will the new organization look? So we did have a reorg as a result of this and putting the organization together. And then there was also consideration of what would be the transaction costs, and how would we like technically structure it, which I can't go into too much detail, but I can say that we did structure it as a holding company so there's a group, so there's group and I run the group, and then to have subsidiaries in Kenya and Nigeria so that we can then layer on other subsidiaries as well. And I think it was, luckily there were people who were working on this who've done mergers before. in our markets. And so it really helped to, I think, accelerate a lot of the, we didn't, I would say we didn't overly engineer what could all the possible scenarios of the structure look like, because we're people who'd had experience and kind of could see the pitfalls, or where not to waste a lot of time overthinking things, especially when you have, I think, very strong, conviction and alignment that you want to do it. So it's like, how do you do it in the most efficient way?
Okay, so I'm taking a little bit of questions that people sent in during registration, and one of it is like, what are the red flags that you looked out for, or that founders and entrepreneurs should look out for when they're in talks about merger? Yeah. Sure.
I'll give a few perspectives of this, because I think it is quite important that how a merger comes together. It can come together in different ways. And in this particular instance, it was a blend of both management and investors who were involved on both sides. I think that if I've heard, and I think this is helpful to share, that when there's only investors who want a merger to happen, and the management, especially if you have founders involved, are not convinced, that is a very difficult merger situation where it's really being pushed and there's not enough alignment for everybody. I think also that the culture really matters a lot. And I think it's an area that if financially things look great, but there's not a culture fit, it's just like, how do you adjust the culture, or how do you address the culture issue and not just think it's going to go away or come back together? And I think that those would be things that are red flags. And I think also a red flag would be something that's not like a negotiation that's not trying to create a greater whole together, but people are just trying to maximize their, the value they get in it, right? So it might be that one entity is a little bit larger than the other, and it's all about, just maximizing on in the favor of one party. I think is a red flag to look out for. And I think and I just would add that maybe a way to potentially address some of these issues, because people might be facing something where they're not sure what the culture difference could be. They're not really aware that, I think there could be ways to start working together and partnering together on something to start to see, even if we want to get to that end goal and we think we want to get there, but we have some insecurities about some of the things I've just shared, that perhaps there's a way to partner together on something that can help us address some of these, like just to know in practice, if we're working together, what that looks like. And that could, because I appreciate that not all of these things can be 100% known before you take that leap.
Was it something that you guys did? Like, did your team have to work with the Baby Bliss team in Nigeria for a bit of time? Like, were there those sort of synergies before? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had a little bit, and we've been open also in terms of sharing information. We had explored a few things, and then we actually did start working together, before finalizing. And that's part of that was because of COVID, because of how much that, so it kind of happened, or, kind of serendipitously, rather than, hey, we're going to start now and then we're going to do this. It just started to happen because COVID was stretching out the timelines.
Okay, so what does the integration now for like the two subsidiaries, what does that look like? Mm-hmm. What are the consumer base in Kenya and the consumer base in Nigeria? Like, what are they going to expect? What are they expecting now on that Bliss group?
Sure. So some of the again, going some of the challenges, talking about the supply chain, has impacted certain plans that we had in terms of broadening product inventory in Kenya, and particularly because Nigeria has a much bigger stock inventory there. So we have finally landed our first stock from Nigeria. And so that's really great because we also have an in-house brand called Soma Baby. So it's under the Soma Baby brand. It's very exciting to reach that stage. And so, but what people can expect is a wider range of products. Can also expect more different types of, we've done, different types of content collaborations with Nigeria, and so and kind of vice versa. So I think really from a product perspective, that's what kind of the consumers would be seeing. And then internally, there's a lot of closer work in terms of marketing strategies, user acquisition. How do we optimize from that side? We're rolling out, two things. One is we're rolling out some new products, not physical products, but let's say features and ways of buying from us that are new, that will be rolled out in the markets at the same time. And we also just kicked off our first, I would say, social impact joint effort, which is in partnership with Unilever. And what that is a recognition that COVID has impacted people differently. And now for the parenting category, there is both a need for information that's very, very targeted. Let's say, you're breastfeeding and you have COVID. I mean, answering questions like that's very localized need and niche information that mothers need. So it's a set of content, and also domestic violence has been on the rise globally in our markets. So there's specific content that we're doing around domestic violence, other things to do with COVID that are part of this joint effort. So they'll be has already started to roll out in Nigeria and Kenya, and also localized health messaging in different languages as well. That is aimed to just and again, targeted to this same core information that pregnant women and mothers are looking for, as well as some what we're calling kind of COVID relief packages. But these are hygiene and sanitation packages that you can gift to another mom. So we're really excited about that because this is a joint work that we're doing in both markets.
Okay. So I know that Baby Bliss was founded in 2017. So it's about 2 years before talks. 2-3 years before the talks about the merger began. Do you think that there is an ideal age companies or startups should get to before they begin thinking about merging forces with another company in the sector? Yeah.
Yes, I remember when we announced it, someone said, "Oh, I thought that's only for big companies, not startups." So I'll answer it in two parts, but just one clarification. Baby Bliss did start a little bit earlier than 2017, but really the expansion of retail and e-commerce was around that time. But I would say that I wouldn't have known a couple of years ago that I'd be doing a merger now. Let's just say that. It's not that predictable. It just is. The way that I would kind of, think about it is, depending what you're trying to achieve, if there are other players, let's say even in your same market, trying to do the same thing, and you're finding, for maybe some of the reasons I talked about or others, that it might make sense to actually merge, I wouldn't be too worried about how old you are as a company. And it's interesting because I think that there's investors who really are very interested in mergers, rolling up, building scale really fast. And I think we're just going to see more of that. So I wouldn't, if something is on someone's mind, I guess if they're on this conversation, they might be exploring this, to not worry about that so much in terms of, it just has to be kind of, do the reasons really make sense for you as a business and for the other party? And and then because there's people out there who literally just do deals, and they go out there looking for people to put deals together, but those tend to be slightly larger and older companies. And I think one advantage of younger companies is that you are, still formulating yourselves in different ways. So it might just be easier to merge instead of having such rigid. You read about a lot of mergers don't create value, but those tend to be talking about more established companies that might take 2 years or 3 years to integrate, just because of the sheer size of them and the amount of work and cost that goes into merging the entities. So.
Okay, so from an investor perspective, I'm wondering what it was like for your investors for Baby investors. Like, what was that discussion like at their own level in terms of the merger? Was there any friction? How did that get resolved? And what, just tell us about that from that perspective.
Yeah, it's such an important perspective, aspect to it, because early on there were some, and I think other people might find this, that you have some very active investors and maybe some investors who are less active in the business. And so in our cases, there were active investors who were involved in the conversations, who helped share a lot of experience because they had also, experienced doing things like this in the past. So I found it extremely helpful, and helped to, their angel investors on both sides. I think not institutional investors. So that might be kind of a different consideration. But if anybody on this call is looking at, hey, I've got angel investors, I think what was important is that we talked to them very early on, said, hey, this is, and everybody's busy, so you don't want to drag people along for like back and forth. It's just like, okay, this is what we're thinking. This is why, and this is what it would mean in terms of your investment. And that definitely took time, because we have several angel investors. Now, so it's about walking through what's going to happen, aligning, adjusting as needed, taking, considering there wasn't a lot of friction. I think, fortunately, there wasn't a lot of friction. It was just about, now everybody's aligned. Now you kind of go and do all the legal work, right? So those things that just take time, that sequencing of getting all the alignment, then doing all the legal work, getting it all signed off. But thankfully not a lot of friction, but I could imagine that there could be. But I think the important thing is like the conversations with every single investor, and not, I think in this kind of case, it's not like an email. You don't send an email saying, hey guys, this is what we're doing, here's the paperwork. It's not one of those situations.
Yeah. Okay. So someone is asking, or someone sent in this question during registration, and which is, how does a startup founder, how does an entrepreneur prepare their business for a merger?
How do you prepare it for a merger? That is a really good question. I think it's very unique to each business, because there was, it wasn't a process where we said, okay, we know, because maybe when you're raising money, you're like, okay, we know this type of level of investor is looking for this kind of revenue or these kind of metrics in order for them to look at our business. It wasn't like that, because, as I was saying, it was organic conversation over time, understanding strengths, weaknesses of both companies, and very transparent. It was like, this is what it is, right? Could it look different in another point in time? Yes. And I think timing is a critical piece to this, because I think there's a lot of great opportunities to merge that may never happen, or discussions that don't come together just from a pure timing perspective. Like had this not started before COVID, it's unlikely it could have happened, right? Because it just in our own scenario, it's quite unlikely. So I don't think there's like a set of things that you can say, because when you're looking at your own company and potentially merging with another one, you're assessing a lot of things about those companies, right? And so it's not like, how do I dress my company up to be the best it could be, because it's a different kind of, from my own experience, different kind of transaction than and really having that transparency of what the other and what the state of the other business is as well. So, but that's just my own experience.
Okay. So just more generally speaking, why do you think that there are not a lot of this sort of transactions, like mergers, in this part of the world? Why do you think that there isn't a lot of mergers here?
It's interesting. There are, I don't know. Let me think. So we're just saying, within the tech space. Is that probably?
Yes, within the tech.
Within the tech space. There have been some, and there have been very notable ones. So I think the One Media Africa roll up, because it was multiple companies into one large, entity, was probably one of the bigger, more complex ones. And there's so I think there are these examples. I think we will see more of them, because I think one of the challenges is, how do we believe like together we can grow faster and pursue this opportunity together. So I think it's also a function of, if you have potentially a Pan-African strategy, or even you're just trying to scale in your own market, that you might kind of reach a point where you realize, okay, there's different ways to go about this. And this is one of those. And so I think maybe as more examples being out, being visible, that this is an approach that some entities took. Because I definitely know a few tech startups here that have merged in the last couple of years. But yeah, it's not a ton. It's kind of a similar question to, why are there not more IPOs, right? And there's a variety of reasons, but there's been a very recent one in Kenya that I think really jolted the market. People like, wow, the company's so young. How could they have gone public? And stimulated a lot of conversation, which is really interesting, right? And kind of, just kind of shows kind of more of the range of possibilities of different approaches to growing companies, because I think there has been like a deep focus on venture capital, and there's a lot of examples of that, right? And so it's interesting. I think it might just be a function of that, but I think we'll probably start to see more. That's my hunch.
Okay. Just pausing to say that we'll soon get into the Q&A section. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the Q&A tab, so that I can get to them a little more quickly. So I was going to ask, I think I know your answer from now, but like from what you've said so far, but if you would you have done anything differently, if you were to redo this process again? Is there anything different?
Let me think. Would I have done anything differently? I think it's too soon to tell, because it's so recent. I don't know if we would have done, knowing what we know, we've done anything differently. I don't think so. I think it's too soon to tell. And I think that, of course, COVID was just so unpredictable that no one, but yeah, I think it's just too soon to tell. Yeah, we could talk in a year. So.
No problem. So back to Elizabeth, you did mention some of the legal paperwork and the fact that the COVID situation sort of made that a drag. But I'm wondering, like, what were some of the specific legal and perhaps regulatory hurdles or challenges that you had to overcome while discussing, while doing this process?
Yeah, I think I don't know how much they are hurdles as much as they are just weighing your options, right? Because you have to kind of make a decision on where do you want to, let's say you want to do one, and let's say it's going to be in multiple markets. So let's say you're pursuing something in multiple markets, you have to make a decision on where do you want to this company entity to sit. And then you have, so I guess actually one of the hurdles is probably taxation. Now that I really think about it, is if you have multiple investors who live in multiple jurisdictions, and they invested in you in one market, right? And they did that knowing the tax implications for them, then you're changing the entity to be in another market. I think that actually is a hurdle that we face, and one that is a big consideration, because it's both what do you do that is optimal or most fair to most people in the situation from a tax perspective, when you're changing the jurisdiction. And then there's I think there's a big part of what's the familiarity that you have, or that other people involved have with, that jurisdiction, because, perhaps Japan is optimal, but we didn't look at Japan because we just have no context to a number of things, right? So I think those are the things to really think about, but also really thinking about it from the people that are going to be affected the most, at least right now, and then also forward-looking a structure that, because we do, if you want to raise money, which we do, would also be optimal for the future. So those are some of the things that you have to really kind of think through, and then just kind of make a call, because nothing's perfect. And then anything else from us, and then you have to really understand what now any tax implications for a transaction of this sort in the markets that you're in, and what does that look like, so that you're really clear on the whole transaction costs. And all this stuff is not, I would say, that clear. I mean, it takes some work. It takes some real legal work to say, okay, this is what this means in Kenya, this is what it means in Nigeria, and any other markets that are involved. So it is something that you definitely need, and you probably need multiple legal support in those different markets, because I don't think I've come across somebody who's an expert in every market, or so you really want to be sure that you're getting the right advice.
So final question before we get into the Q&A, and that would be, so you mentioned already that part of the challenges now with Bliss Group, just particularly as a result of the COVID, is the supply chain aspect. But what else is like, what else are you still trying to figure out with the new entity? What else are you still trying to sort of iron out now that you have this one holding company?
Yes, I think there is the some of just the operational working, which areas do you need to have the same systems and processes in the different markets, and where does it not matter? I think that's probably what we're in the middle of trying to figure out. And I think that we made a decision up front not to change the brands in each market. And so I think that we're not questioning that decision, but I think it comes up now and again about, okay, we're going to roll out a new product under one brand in the new market. Is that fine? Or how do so I think it comes up now more than before in terms of making some decisions, but none of them are, you just make the decision and move on, because we felt like a rebrand was something that could happen in the future, was not necessary for right now. Yeah.
Okay. So I think, would that be the reason why you've chosen to keep the brands as they are? So MumsVillage, Baby Bliss, just for the future, there might be like a rebranding coming?
Yes, there could be a rebranding coming. And part of the reason again, I think this is one of the things that slows these types of mergers or things down, is you can spend a lot of time trying to decide, are we going to be one or the other, or a new brand? And then there's not only that decision, and then you've built brand equity in both markets, but there's also then to actually rebrand is a quite an expensive and involving process that I've been through before in previous companies, so I know what it entails. And we felt like this wasn't necessary right now. Could be needed in the future, but let's not over-engineer what we're doing, because that's what other big companies do. I mean, I think that's another example of like what a big company might have to absolutely do and take a lot to rebrand over a couple of years, versus like a startup that may choose to look at it differently, and the timing of it differently.
Okay, so we'll get into the questions. Please remember to drop your questions in the Q&A tab if you have any, so that we can get to them in the next 30 to 35 minutes before we round up. So Marvin is asking, what kinds of materials, I guess maybe what kinds of documents did you show to your investors about what would happen during the merger?
Okay, so what we did was a conversation. So started with the conversation to talk through what we're doing. All the investors that we have are all very experienced professionals, very helpful to get their input as well on tweaking the approach. So it was seen as something that you have a conversation about. You first kind of really have a conversation, follow up on email of the details, and then had the legal documentation drafted. There wasn't a deck. I think there was a question of like, there wasn't a deck of like, this is exactly how it's going to work, because however, I do think that if you have institutional investors, that might actually be necessary, because they have different stakeholders, you know, in terms of like their LPs or whoever else. So I could definitely see a deck being necessary in that situation.
Okay, Marvin has a follow-up question. Marvin, would it be okay if we allow you answer live? I think you can turn on your video and answer your question and ask your question live, Marvin.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope you all could hear me. I can't see the setting for my video, so I'll leave it off for now.
Okay.
But thank you. I appreciate that. My question is, nice to meet everyone. My question, the follow-up is that, were there foreign exchange issues when you had to make the payouts to the investors on the cap table of the target company? So the company that was acquired. That's my question. I'm curious about that process.
Okay. So just a clarification, we did merge and one was not acquired. However, part of your question is relevant. And I think, I don't recall there being major Forex issues. I don't recall that, but it was a merger and not an acquisition, just to clarify.
Okay, and as a part of the merger, was there a payout to people from any of the entities who were previously investors?
There was, but I don't recall any Forex issues that really came up. But also, we don't have as, how do you say it? I think for the most part, everything was in dollars. So I don't, it was not a issue.
Difference in currency.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, thank you, Marvin. Someone else is asking, I think this is more of like a general question around investments, but it's something around looking for investors. Do you look for investors to work on the? Did you look for investors to work on the merger, or did you just position it in a way that they came around looking for you? And if that's clear.
Yeah, I can see the question. I think it's more of a general question about. I mean, in my own experience and most experience of most startups that I know of, and I've talked to founders. The founders are pursuing investors and trying to look for the right investors. Of course, investors are also looking for opportunity. And so I think it's a bit of both. I think for us, it's more on pursuing investment, because also people have to know you're looking for money, right? I don't think many companies experience that, hey, they're not looking for money and people are knocking down their doors. There are some. But I think for the most part, you have to signal that you're looking for money. So it can be a bit more of the onus on the company to start to communicate that and start to engage investors.
Okay. Someone else is asking, Jesh says, one of the changes in M&As are the culture changes between the merging entities. What culture differences do you see and what structures do you have in place to address this?
Right. Yeah. A good question. We do have from the outside kind of similar business like working cultures to start with. I think that the main challenge that we've faced, well, partly is that we're not yet physically spending time with each other since COVID started, and so that was something that was expected, that management on both sides. Luckily, Nigerian management came here before, but that there would be more of that exchange. And so I think that sometimes communication might be probably the biggest. It's not a huge difference, but that's the, and you know, we all have like, this is a great call, but there's a lot of connectivity, just nightmare sometimes that to just really be able to get stuff done. But you know, surprisingly, there hasn't been major and I checked with the team before this call, so I think there haven't been major issues on this front. I think that the people are just very eager, I would say, from the Kenya side to go to Nigeria, have a chance to experience Lagos, and they've not had that opportunity given COVID yet. So I think that's one of the current disappointments of the end. But I think there's just it's in a good place, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Someone sent this in during the registration, and it is, what peculiar challenges do you think there are to overcome for women in tech?
Oh, what challenges? That is. Let me think. I think things have changed a lot. I think they keep changing for the better. I think that what are the main challenges? Well, I think the challenges for women are twofold. And one, that there's structural issues in our markets that impact women negatively. And those are the types of conversations that they're certainly happening in Kenya, hopefully in Nigeria as well, where, for example, it started in the tech industry here, but you cannot have a conference panel that is all men. That just stopped. It came, like, there was so much pushback that happened for years and years and years. And eventually there was enough rabble rousing by women and men as well that this is just not reflective of reality. So there's high consciousness around inclusion of women in conversations, whether it's panels, whether it's investment committees, is becoming much more, I would say, even 1 to 2 years ago, it wasn't common for any venture capital firm to have a gender component to like how they look at teams, at founders, and then the team composition. Yes, they're the gender lens investors, which are great and have come in because of this issue, but seeing a lot of these like mainstream saying, oh, you know, we have this 30% of our portfolio needs to have women founders and do X, Y, and Z. And that is because of this pressure from ordinary people to say this is just doesn't make, you know, this bias is very real in terms of, and I think in a lot of ways, I'll speak more for Kenya, but I think in a lot of ways, we're ahead of the US and some other markets in terms of that conversation and people not pushing back and saying, you know, it's fine to not have women anywhere, which was the conversation 5 years ago. So I think for women, I think we're in a much stronger place because the structural issues are being addressed in a much more open and non-defensive way. And that makes it much easier to be able to address them. And so I think that it's not to say that there's not still a lot of bias. And I think that we need to be able to call out bias when we see it, find ways to do that, and find ways to influence around that. Because I think those are the biggest hurdles that I think women in tech face, is just, you know, not being taken seriously, not having to have a much, how do you say it? There's a lot of bias with gender in general that men tend to be seen based on their potential, and women are seen to be based on what they've done. And this is a big issue in fundraising, right? Because it's much easier for a man to have credibility saying, I'm going to build a $100 million business in 5 years. A woman can say that, but the question of like, well, what have you done to get there is much more the question that women will face than men will. And this is very well documented. So I don't want anyone to be naive in thinking that that this doesn't exist, whether you're a man sitting on this call, a decision maker, a founder, or a woman. This is very real across the world. And I think that it's important to be aware of it and do what you can to address it, because there's real change that's happened in a short amount of time, which is quite encouraging.
Okay. So I think as we round up, do you have any you have any advice? Do you have any comments for like startup founders or entrepreneurs who are on call and who are starting businesses but also should be considering how to merge forces with like peers in order to grow or scale or move a lot faster than they normally would, or they would normally do? Do you have any last words? Do you have any advice?
I do, and there's also one last question here that I like. How well do you think this merger positions us to be in the multi-billion-dollar future? I think we're well positioned, so I will say that. I would definitely encourage, number one, I think it's great that people join calls like this because there's so much to be learned from the experience of others that are in the markets we're talking about. And I think, again, going back to the local content, there's tons of content about local entrepreneur stories around the world, which serve a certain purpose. But there are things that are very different for us. And so I think that I've attended some calls of founders in Nigeria and found them so interesting, just the reality of what people are facing, because we are in very challenging environments. We don't have easy access to capital. We don't have, and when I say that, I mean kind of the range of everything. If you want to go get a bank loan, see how hard that is, right? If you want to get, I mean, it's a difficult environment to get the capital that you need at the time that you need it, even to understand what capital you need to get. That could also be a question. And I think that it's important to know that you're in a difficult environment. It's good to understand from what peers are doing, what they're experiencing, and to be open to opportunities like this to merge. I don't think that it's I remember some people advising, say, well, mergers, like founders' egos are just always get in the way. And that just wasn't the case. There wasn't, I don't know, it's because we're women, I don't know what it is, but there wasn't founder ego issues of grandiosity or something. And so I think that that's where just being open to kind of these kind of potential opportunities is useful. There was something else I was going to say that I was talking to somebody who invests in media companies, not in our markets, elsewhere, US, et cetera, and said some of the portfolio companies that they looked at, they had just merged 2 in their own portfolio. And one of the things that the founder of one of them said is just, I wish I'd done this sooner. Like, I wish I had really thought about this and not been so determined that I have to go it my way 100% of the time, forever and ever. So I think that's something that is something to really be considered. And that's why I was really happy to have this conversation with you today.
Okay. I don't know if you have any more. Do you want to expand on this last question around, how the merger positions Village Group for the baby care market in Africa?
Yeah, it does well position it, because certainly the feedback from the investors that we're talking to is that, this made a lot of sense. It really, it makes it easier to make an investment decision and move forward on it, because part of, even just what I was telling you, it took some time to do all the paperwork, get things done. If an investor is looking at that, they know it's going to take a long time. They'd rather, and their own process takes a long time. They'd rather do it when it's done, right? And so I think that that's one thing that is well positioning. I think it's also that really seeing that you can operate the strategy in multiple markets, because there aren't other players doing that. And so to really then, and it goes a bit to the track record piece, right? Show that, oh, this is great. You can show that this could be done, right? And then showing that there's the synergies across to make this, to really have the entity grow faster. So that's what I would say. So I think it is quite well positioning, and has, I would say, changed the investor conversation if I compare it to before it happened.
All right, Isis, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really great to have you on the call. Okay, Cynthia is asking, in your experience, what important factors should a company have in place in order to attract a merger and acquisition?
Yeah, so this question was asked earlier a little bit differently, but I think because she's added an acquisition, I think that's different in the sense that, fundamentally, if you want to sell your business, then you do want to kind of say dress it up, right? You do want to have a look the best it can, right? So whatever you're dealing with, you want to show that this is, and really think through what you both, who is a likely entity to want to acquire you, what are they looking for, right? Because even acquisitions, they take time, they take relationship building. So it's worthwhile, I would say to Cynthia, that if something you're thinking about, let's just say acquisition, and you're thinking, okay, this is the kind of company that would potentially, I would start having those conversations now, even with some that you think, hey, they would never acquire me, but what they would tell me about what they would want to see will help me to understand what my business needs to look like, even if it's going to be another buyer, but there's somebody similar. So it's kind of like a low risk type of one, that where you say, okay, they see that what they are asking for, I'm far from that. It's not a big risk because I'm actually not targeting them, but it can help me shape who I speak to and understand what they want to see and what would make them want to acquire. And then I would also go back to the timing thing. I think if it's something you want to do, there's an opportunity, I would pursue it, because things are so uncertain, especially right now, that it's not that I'm gonna, if my company looks better in 6 months, that deal might still be there as well. So as long as you see what I'm saying, that not everybody is sitting around with cash to buy companies at any time. Yeah.
There's a question here, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the person really wants to know, because it's an anonymous question, and the person is saying,
kind of, yeah.
Yeah, go on.
The identity one, yeah. Do you struggle losing some part of your identity, so to speak? I think this is a really good question, because I do think as a founder, you do have to let go. I think that you have to start to let go at some point along the way, in terms of that really, really strong identity with the company, because you and the company are separate, and it's hard, and it might take time. But the sooner you kind of have that some of that distance, it makes it easier to actually make more rational decisions as well. So I think that for me, that probably came before the merger. But as you can see, the name MumsVillage is not in the name of the holding company, right? But I think I had enough kind of personal distance from the brand prior to this to not feel like it has to be there. We have to make it Bliss Village, or I don't, and especially because we were going with the subsidiary approach, and that the brands would stay intact in the different markets. Because sometimes that what's the word, attachment can be detrimental.
Okay. So I think that's all. We are not getting any more questions. Thank you all for staying with us today on the call. My colleague Muiwa is going to share links to a survey. So please fill the survey and let us know what your thoughts are about the event, about the webinar, and how we can make it better. Our next TC Live is on October 23rd. There'll also be a link for you to register to attend. A recording of this conversation will be made available to everyone. It will also be available on our website, techcabal.com. Also sign up for our newsletter so that you can get informed about technology, the impacts, the business of it across the continent. We send it out every weekday morning at 7 a.m. West Africa time. So please do sign up. The links will be made available as well on the screen. So I think that's it for today. Isis, thank you so much for being here with us. Really appreciate it, and I really had a good time conversing about Bliss Group. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you all for staying with us. And do enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye.